Hi, today I want to talk about reducing pain in life, overcoming pain, and dealing with obstacles in life, and how to move forward and have a more productive, happy, and peaceful life. Is it true what Seneca says, that we suffer more in the imagination than we do in reality? Or is it the case that we simply have to get on with the pains and sufferings of life and just accept them as they are? I feel the answer to this is firmly yes, we can overcome many obstacles and we can reduce the pain in life. But the question then is how? How can we do it? You see, first of all, in order to answer this problem of how to deal with pain, how to deal with suffering, we have to understand is why do we suffer in the first place? And the reason why we suffer in the first place is largely because of our desires. You see, if we desire something and that desire is unfulfilled, then this brings about a stage of suffering. Now, of course, you could say fulfill your desires and you won't suffer. But how can you fulfill all of your desires? And this is part of the problem. Another aspect of the problem is that life itself is basically traumatic. You can't get away from it. There's a lot of traumas in life. Uh, Even if you had a utopian society, you still have things like accidents, you still have things like relational problems. So realistically, what can we do back in the real world to cope, to reduce the pain and cope? And I'm going to give you two defensive strategies and one offensive strategy. And the two defensive strategies, the first one is to reduce your ego. You see, it's okay that we desire, but how attached are we to things in our life? To what degree are we making things bigger and worse than they are? Presently, I live in India, and I've been living in India for quite a while now. But I do remember back in the early days when I used to visit India, and then I go back to Ireland. And I was always amazed when I got into the airport in Dublin, and I see so many unhappy faces, depressed faces. But if you just come from India, you come into Dublin, and everything looks clean, everything's nice, everything's new looking. There's not too much population. There's no holes all over the roads. Everything's really nice. And I realized upon coming back to Ireland, objectively, Irish people have everything they could possibly need. They have absolutely everything they could need, but they have an existential angst. And this is basically largely a problem of ego. If you come to India, by and large, people tend to smile a lot, they're very friendly. Now they have a tough life. It's a stressful life living in India. But the point I'm saying is that why is it that Western civilization tends to be so nihilistic, have so much existential angst compared to the developing world where often you go to a poorer country, you see people smiling and getting on with things. And the reason why is our ego attachment. Our ego is too attached to the life situation we're in, and we make things bigger and worse than they are. So by reducing ego, we're just letting go of the over attachment to external things. So I'm not saying you shouldn't desire something, but how much is your ego attached to it? If you look at a person, for example, who's spiraling into, say, depression and a person that starts becoming suicidal, one thing you'll always notice with suicidal people is they just think about themselves. If you talk to a lot of people about mental health problems, they're always thinking about themselves. It's like everything starts going around their little world and their little problems. And so what's actually happening is their ego is too attached to everything that's happening to them. I'll give you a couple of practical examples. Let's say you go to the dentist. Are you going to think about him scratching your teeth or trying to think about something else? Obviously, you're going to try and think about something else. Let's say you talk about going to let's say, for example, you're stuck in a traffic jam. You're going to keep thinking about the traffic or you're going to think about something else. You're going to think about something else. So in everyday life, we have this habit of diverting our mind away from things we don't like. But yet, when it comes to big things, we tend to fixate over them and think and think and think and worry and worry and worry and fear and fear and fear. And that's a bad idea. And all we have to do is to reduce the ego. How do we reduce the ego? Well, first of all, we can't get rid of the ego. The ego is like a weed. It will just keep coming back and back and back. You can't get rid of it. But how can you reduce the ego? Well, you see, the basic way to reduce the ego is to become self-aware enough that you realize that you're being egotistical. And then to reduce the ego, how you reduce it is by thinking, maybe I'm not right. Maybe the other person's viewpoint has a point. That's one way. We start becoming aware of other people around us. Another way is appreciation. Switch on the news. And instead of feeling depressed about the world, feel happy that at least you're not in that situation. No matter how bad your situation is, somebody somewhere else is having it worse. Gratitude. Start developing an attitude of gratitude. So when you start to become aware of the people around you and understand their problems and their issues, and it's not all about me, that's shrinking the ego. When you start having an attitude of gratitude towards life, again, that's shrinking the ego as you start to have a bigger picture. Stephen Covey talks a lot about this with this idea of a circle of influence and circle of concern. If you have a big circle of concern, you're unhappy. If you have a big circle of influence, you're happy. So focus on the things that you can focus on. Another thing we have to understand about ego is that there's a false ego and a true ego. So people tend to think the ego is bad, he's egotistical, and so on. Who or what is a false ego? The false ego is that part of yourself that just thinks about you all the time. And it's not really you. What actually happens is early in life, you start looking to try and give yourself a sense of identity. So you looked at the world around you, and in the process, you created a false image. What the famous French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan would call the mirror image. But the mirror image is always backwards. Right is actually left, and so on. So you fall in love with your mirror image. You think that's you, but it's not you. And it's an image that's full of attributes. It's an image that is not really you. It's who you think you should be and how you think you should be in life. Then you have the true self, the true ego, the true self. And that's the special you that you came into the world with. The you that you really are. That's your true self. And my belief is that we come into the world perfect, but through conditioning, we learn to mirror and we create a fantasy of who we are. And in the process, we distance ourselves from who we are. So we have to actually we distance ourselves from who we are. So what we actually have to do is we have to find ourselves, okay? And that means just weeding out all the crap and getting back to who you are, okay? So it's not that your ego is bad, and you actually have true desires. Desires get a bad rap here. You actually have true desires because you have a destiny in life, you have a mission, and your true desires are pointing you in that true north towards where you should be going in your life, okay? So shrinking the ego is not reducing ourselves, but just gaining a perspective. The second of these two defensive strategies I'll give you is Stoicism. Now, if you're looking at the internet these days, you see a lot of Stoicism. Basically, the Roman Empire, there's these philosophers from that era, which are called Stoics. The Roman Empire tends to get a bad rap because we tend to think of the gladiators, the Colosseum, the Christians being eaten by the tigers or lions, the orgies, the conquest, etc. But what you have to remember is the Roman Empire ran for 1101 years. It ran for a long time. And the early Romans were actually very nationalistic in a positive way. They had a very strong sense of civilization. They're very inspired by the Greek philosophers. They wanted to make a better world, although those days that was through conquest. And where they went, peace and order tend to follow, because one way you could look at the old movies and see all the Romans killing everybody, but everybody's killing everybody anyway, without order. At least with the Romans, you had people killing each other to some degree, at least, with order. Anyway, the early Romans were actually pretty virtuous and hardworking. The other stuff, the debauchery and all, came later. So if we look at the Stoics, what they basically understood was that you can't avoid trauma. No matter how you try, no matter how perfect your life is, there will always be some degree of trauma in your life. So what to do about it? It's amazing. Like I said earlier with the dentist example, we reduce our attachment to minor things, but we don't reduce our attachment to big things. What the Stoics realized is that there's certain things I need to do to help myself. One thing is to accept that pain is part of reality. You see, when I go to the dentist, I'm accepting a certain amount of pain. When I'm driving through traffic, I'm accepting a certain amount of pain. While I take on a job with a lot of responsibilities, or say family life, I'm taking on a certain amount of pain. I accept that there's a certain amount of pain, and that's the price I have to pay is dealing with pain. And there's a difference between pain and suffering. Pain is just pain, suffering is thinking about the pain. Either the pain coming up, the pain you're having now, or the pain you had. Okay? Pain is just pain. We can actually sit with pain, and we can marinate in it a bit and absorb it and integrate it into our personality and get over the trauma. So that's one thing. Part of it as well is that they say not to pursue pleasure or pain, because there's two flips. Wherever you have pleasure, you have pain. Where you have pain, you have pleasure. So they will believe you're too much into pleasure, bad thing. Now, they get a bad rap for this. People say they're very boring and not having a passionate life. And I agree, it's not good. But let's think of it this way. It's okay to have pleasure, but pleasure must have a measure. I'm sure you've seen these celebrities, we all see these celebrity interviews where a celebrity had a drug problem and all sorts of different problems in life, big ego, etc. And they went to rehab or something, and they learned to cook their own dinner and wash their own dishes and have a more simple life. Okay? These are people who are put into a situation that they can have as much pleasure as they wanted. And the weird thing is, you go into this hedonism thing with so much pleasure that after a while you ain't getting any joy out of it. So pleasure within measure. And again, going back to the first point, is don't be egotistically attached. Don't be egotistically attached. If you go back to, again, the Stoic ideas, do your duty. So have a value system. Do your duty, do the best you can, and accept the results come what may. That's another aspect which I like of the Stoics. So the Stoics are taking this philosophical approach to life. To quote Marcus Aurelius, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will have strength. What he means here is that we do our duty, we do the best we can, we don't worry about the outcome. Okay? I know that's a difficult concept in today's society because people tend to think in a very independently, I want, I need, I want, I have to have mentality, versus this mentality that the ancient Roman Stoics had of serving the society. But he has a point. In other words, find your duty and do your duty. Now, you might say, well, that's very boring. And I know we all look back, maybe our parents or grandparents were very dutiful people. They were dutifully getting on with the job they didn't like, dutifully married into the person they didn't like, and so on. And that's not good. I agree. But what the Stoics are talking about here is not this duty to something that's not my value system. The society just tells me to have a duty. No, a duty to yourself. And this comes to the proactive side of today's talk. So we had shrink your ego, we have Stoicism, be philosophical. And the third thing, the proactive one we can have is find your passion. Okay? Because the other two are reacting to life and protecting ourselves. But finding your passion is a proactive way, because if you look at the title of this video is reduce the pain of life, but also overcome adversity. And you have to say, why would I want to overcome adversity? I'd want to overcome adversity because I got some goals in my life. So first of all, you have to find out what you want in life, not what does your mom like, or your boss, or your brother, your sister, your husband, your auntie, the guy down the street, the person selling a car who wants to sell you a car. Not what he wants, not what she wants. What do you want out of your life? So finding your passion begins with having goals. And how do you have goals? You have to do some self-reflection and find out what you really want, what really rocks your boat. Not what you think what rocks your boat, but what really does rock your boat. An aspect of this is congruence. There's a term in maths called congruence, where if two things are very similar to each other, they're in harmony with each other, they're very same as each other, we say they're congruent. But we can also say that with life. Is your internal life congruent? Is your internal life congruent with your external life? If there's some congruency, you will have a job that you like, career that you like. If there's no congruency, you will be quite unhappy whatever job or career is there. And if there is congruency, then you'll be very happy because you'll have a life path. The quotation here from Jeff Bezos, which I think really labels it for Jeff Bezos. You could have a job or a career, or you could have a calling. If you can somehow figure out how to have a calling, you've hit the jackpot, because that's the big thing. 3 things. A job pays the bills. A career, 3 things. A job pays the bills. A career has a future. You're actually developing a career over time. But the third one is a calling. What does that mean? A calling is what we, in previous eras, we call a vocation. A vocation is something that you are passionate about, that you love more than anything else, and nothing is going to get in your way. And that is a calling. And that's when we have full congruence in our life between the outer and inner. In other words, my work is my play is my work. Then we are congruent. Now, how does this help us overcome adversity? You see, if my ego is big and I'm not very philosophical and I'm very self-centered, adversity is enormous. Even the smallest adversity is terribly hard. But if I've reduced my ego, and if I become more philosophical, and if I've taken my false ego and reduced it and increased my true ego, in other words, finding out what I really want to do in life, and if I find out what I want to really do and I start aligning myself to that lifestyle, what happens then is that those adversities shrink. Because the reality is, no matter how big the adversity is, it's not that big. Every adversity is limited. In every problem is the seeds of a solution. There's no problem that doesn't have a solution. So when we've got this big picture, when we're living for this serving society, fulfilling some grand dream of mine, then these things become small. When I'm living my passion, the adversities are just part of the process. I don't even think about it. So the problem we tend to have at life is we're having a painful life, we're having a life with a lot of adversity, when we're confused, when we're a little bit too egotistical, a little bit too self-centered, and we have nothing really to live for. So I challenge you today to try and find out what is your passion and pursue it. And it's not an easy task. It's not something you can do in 5 minutes. If you're here watching this video, you probably did a lot of this work already. Maybe this is just a reminder to this. To work on finding out your passion and work towards fulfilling a lifestyle whereby you're congruent in how you do things. If you do this, you'll be productive, happy, peaceful, and satisfied with your life. The one last caveat I'd like to add is you have to do a lot of soul searching. It shouldn't be somebody else's dream. And even something that was your dream 10 years ago might not be your dream today. And also some reality checking. How real is that dream? Somebody's dream might be, for example, to travel around the world for a few years. And that could be great, but then maybe 6 months into it, you realize they're just ticking boxes. Is that really your dream? Is there anything bigger? If we can find something transcendent, something that connects with the society as a whole and helps other people, usually that will make us happier than just a goal that's like, I just want to climb a mountain. So again, bit of reality check. But there are the 3 things I want to share with you today for reducing the pain of life and overcoming adversity is to shrink the ego, become more philosophical about life in general, and find your passion and become congruent in your life. And if your life is very incongruent, like everything is at odds, then you got a lot of work to do to balance it. And you can balance it, but it will take you time. I hope this helps you, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you.